My daughter-in-law called me a fat pig at her own wedding reception. My name is Colonel Nolan Thompson, and I'm a retired Army veteran. What my daughter-in-law Sandra didn't know was that her father's business empire was hanging by a thread, and I was the one holding the scissors. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't storm out. I just sat there in my wheelchair, watching her celebrate while planning my next move. You see, some people think quiet means weak. They think a man in a wheelchair with a prosthetic leg can't fight back. They think someone who shops at Walmart and drives a beat-up Ford can't touch their precious world. They're wrong. If you're watching this, please subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Let me tell you how a single wedding toast changed everything, and why sometimes the quietest person in the room has the loudest voice. The whole thing started 6 months earlier when my son Marcus announced his engagement to Sandra Sterling. I was happy for him. Marcus deserved love after everything he'd been through watching me recover from Afghanistan. But from day one, Sandra made it clear she thought I was beneath her family's standards. The first sign came during their engagement dinner at some fancy steakhouse downtown. Sandra's parents, Preston and Margaret Sterling, owned a chain of luxury hotels. They drove matching white BMWs and lived in a gated community where the average house cost more than most people make in a lifetime. I showed up in my usual outfit. Walmart jeans, a flannel shirt, and my comfortable walking shoes that accommodate my prosthetic. Sandra took one look at me and whispered something to her mother. Margaret's expression changed instantly, like she'd just smelled something unpleasant. "So, Nolan," Preston said, cutting into his $40 steak, "Marcus tells us you're between jobs right now?" I wasn't between anything. I'd been running my own business for 4 years ever since I got out of Walter Reed Medical Center. But I kept that to myself. "I stay busy," I said. Sandra laughed. Not a nice laugh. "Dad, he fixes things for people, like handyman stuff." The way she said it made it sound like I cleaned sewers for a living. That was the first sign I didn't belong in their world. The second sign came when they started planning the wedding. Sandra wanted everything perfect and expensive. The venue alone cost $25,000 for one day. The flowers were another $8,000. The photographer charged $15,000, and that was just for the basics. "We want to make sure everything reflects our family's reputation," Sandra told Marcus one afternoon when I was visiting. I was sitting right there, but she talked like I was invisible. Marcus looked uncomfortable. "Sandra, maybe we should scale back a little. My dad's already doing so much." "Your dad?" Sandra's voice got sharp. "What exactly is your dad contributing besides showing up?" That's when Marcus told her. I'd been quietly covering the entire wedding cost. $120,000 paid in full, no questions asked. Sandra's face went through about 5 different emotions in 10 seconds. Surprise, confusion, suspicion, and finally something that looked like disgust. "Where did he get that kind of money?" she asked Marcus later, thinking I couldn't hear from the kitchen. "I don't know," Marcus admitted. "He's never talked about his finances." "Well, it's probably insurance money from his injury," Sandra said. "You know, guilt money from the Army or whatever." Guilt money. Like my leg was a business transaction. I'd gained about 40 pounds since Afghanistan. The medications, the depression, the months of learning to walk again, it all added up. I used to be lean and strong. Now I needed a cane most days and a wheelchair when my leg hurt too much. Sandra never let me forget it. "Nolan, maybe you should sit at the family table," she'd say when we went out to dinner. "You know, so you're more comfortable." Then she'd put me at the kids' table in the corner. Or, "Nolan, I found this great physical therapist. Maybe she could help you get back in shape for the wedding photos." Each comment was like a small knife, designed to remind me that I wasn't the man I used to be. But here's what Sandra didn't understand about veterans. We don't break easy. And we definitely don't forget. The wedding was set for June 15th at Riverside Country Club. 150 guests, all the Sterling family's friends and business associates. Marcus's friends from college, my old Army buddies who could make it. I had no idea that wedding would become the day Sandra learned a lesson about respect she'd never forget. By May, I realized that staying silent was costing me more than just my dignity. It was costing me my son. Marcus had started making excuses for me. When Sandra complained about my appearance, he'd apologize on my behalf. When she made comments about my weight or my disability, he'd change the subject instead of defending me. I watched my own son become ashamed of his father, and that cut deeper than any IED ever could. The breaking point came 3 weeks before the wedding. Sandra was showing her friends the venue, and I happened to be there dropping off a payment to the wedding coordinator. "Oh my God, is that your future father-in-law?" one of her friends whispered, loud enough for me to hear. "Unfortunately," Sandra replied. "Marcus's dad is, well, he's been through a lot, the war and everything. It's really sad, actually." She said it with that fake sympathy voice people use when they want to sound caring but really just want to gossip. "I mean, I feel terrible for him," Sandra continued, "but honestly, I'm embarrassed. Look at him. He's let himself go completely. And the way he dresses, it's like he doesn't even try." Her friend made a sympathetic noise. "That must be so hard for Marcus." "It is. Marcus won't admit it, but I know he's embarrassed too. I mean, what are our friends going to think? What are my father's business associates going to think when they see him at the wedding?" I stood there in the hallway, holding my cane, listening to my future daughter-in-law discuss my worth like I was a broken piece of furniture she had to work around. That night, I called my old commanding officer, General Patricia Hayes. She'd been asking to visit for months, but I'd always made excuses. Now I had a different kind of request. "Pat," I said, "remember that conversation we had about respect? Jim, you sound different. What's going on? I need a favor, and I need to tell you about a wedding." General Hayes had been my CO during my last deployment. She'd visited me at Walter Reed, helped me navigate the medical discharge, and stayed in touch during my recovery. She understood what service meant, what sacrifice looked like. More importantly, she understood that some battles don't end when you come home. "There's something else," I told her. "I need you to look into Sterling hotels, Preston Sterling specifically. Run his name through your Pentagon contacts." "Jim, what aren't you telling me?" "Just trust me on this one, Pat. And clear your calendar for June 15th. The stakes weren't just personal anymore. They were about every veteran who'd ever been dismissed because of their injuries. Every disabled person who'd been treated like a burden. Every parent who'd watched their adult child choose a spouse's approval over family loyalty. But there was something else at stake, too. Something Sandra and her family had no idea about. 3 days after my conversation with General Hayes, I got the call I'd been expecting. "Mr. Thompson, this is Janet Morrison from Sterling Hotel's corporate office. Mr. Preston Sterling would like to schedule a meeting with you about a potential business opportunity." I almost smiled. "What kind of opportunity?" "Well, sir, we understand your company works in the defense sector. Mr. Sterling is very interested in diversifying Sterling Hotel's revenue streams, and he's heard that government contracts can be quite substantial." Substantial. That was one word for it. "I'll have to check my calendar," I said. "Sir, if I may be direct, Mr. Sterling is hoping to move quickly on this. Sterling Hotels has some time-sensitive financial obligations, and partnering with an established defense contractor could help us meet certain benchmarks." Time-sensitive financial obligations. Corporate speak for, we're about to go under. I'd done my homework on Preston Sterling's business months ago, right after Marcus announced the engagement. Sterling Hotels was leveraged to the hilt. $80 million in debt, revenue down 30% year over year, and 3 major properties already in foreclosure proceedings. They needed a miracle, or a $50 million annual defense contract. "Tell Mr. Sterling I'll be in touch after the wedding," I said. "The wedding, sir?" "My son's wedding to his daughter, June 15th. There was a long pause. "Sir, did you say your son is marrying Sandra Sterling?" "That's right." Another pause. "And you're the Nolan Thompson who owns Thompson Defense Systems?" "I am." Oh my God, sir, I had no idea. Mr. Sterling doesn't know either, does he?" "No," I said. "He doesn't." The wedding was still 3 weeks away, but suddenly I was very much looking forward to it. The first real confrontation happened at the rehearsal dinner. Sandra had reserved the private dining room at the most expensive restaurant in town. 40 guests, 3-course meal, open bar. Everything had to be perfect for her parents' friends and her father's business associates. I arrived in my usual clothes, clean khakis, a button-down shirt from Kohl's, and my walking cane. Nothing fancy, but respectful. Sandra took one look at me and her face went tight. "Nolan," she said, her voice artificially sweet, I thought we discussed the dress code for tonight. Business casual, I said. This is business casual. Well, she looked me up and down like I was wearing a clown costume. I suppose it's too late to change now. The first hour went fine. I sat with Marcus and made polite conversation with the other guests. But I could feel Sandra watching me, waiting for something. The moment came when Preston Sterling stood up to make a toast. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, raising his champagne glass, "tomorrow we celebrate the union of two wonderful families. The Sterlings are gaining a son, and I couldn't be happier to welcome Marcus into our fold." He paused, looking around the room. "Now I know some of you are meeting Marcus's father for the first time tonight. Nolan has had challenges. He's shown tremendous courage in his recovery, and we admire that." I felt the room's attention shift to me, polite smiles, sympathetic nods, the kind of look people give wounded animals at the zoo. "But what I admire most," Preston continued, "is how he's raised such a fine young man despite his circumstances. Marcus is going places in this world, and we're proud to support his journey. Despite his circumstances, like I was an obstacle Marcus had to overcome." Sandra raised her glass next. "To family," she said, "and to always striving to be our best selves." Her eyes found mine across the room when she said best selves. After the toast, Sandra made her way over to my table. She'd had a few glasses of wine and her filter was slipping. "Nolan, can I ask you something?" she said, sitting down uninvited. "Sure. Do you ever think about, trying harder? Trying harder at what?" "Well," she gestured vaguely at me, "your appearance, your health. I mean, I get that you've been through trauma. But it's been, 5 years? Don't you think it's time to move forward?" Marcus was talking to his college friends across the room. He couldn't hear us. "I have moved forward," I said quietly. "Have you, though? Because honestly, looking at you—" She shook her head. "It's just sad, you know? Marcus deserves better than having to make excuses for his father at social events." "What kind of excuses?" "Oh, come on, you know what I mean. People ask about you, and what is he supposed to say? That his dad got hurt in the war and never bothered getting his life back together?" I set down my water glass very carefully. "Is that what you think happened? Isn't it?" Sandra leaned forward. "Nolan, I'm not trying to be mean. I'm trying to help. Marcus loves you, but he's embarrassed. I can see it." "And you're not embarrassed?" She laughed. That same laugh from the engagement dinner. "Honestly, a little. But I'm working with what I've got, right?" The conversation was starting to draw attention from nearby tables. Sandra's voice had gotten louder. "Look," she said, "I know this is hard to hear, but someone needs to say it. Tomorrow is my wedding day, the most important day of my life, and I need you to understand that this isn't about you." I never said it was. Good, because I've worked too hard on this wedding to have it ruined by negativity. "What kind of negativity?" "The kind that comes from people feeling sorry for the broken veteran in the corner." The words hung in the air between us. A few people at nearby tables had stopped talking. I could have escalated right then. I could have told her exactly what I thought of her attitude, but that wasn't my style. Instead, I stood up slowly, using my cane for support. "Sandra," I said, just loud enough for her to hear, "tomorrow is going to be a very interesting day." "What's that supposed to mean?" "You'll find out." I started to walk away, but she grabbed my arm. "Nolan, wait. I don't want there to be any hard feelings between us." I looked down at her hand on my arm, then back at her face. "There won't be any hard feelings," I said. She smiled, thinking she'd won. "Good. I'm glad we understand each other." "We do," I said. "Perfectly." But as I walked away, I heard her whisper to her friend, "God, I hope he doesn't embarrass us tomorrow." Her friend whispered back, "What if he does?" "Then Marcus will have to choose," Sandra said, "his wife or his father. And I know which one pays for his lifestyle." I kept walking, but I heard every word. The rehearsal dinner ended an hour later. As guests filtered out to their cars, I noticed Preston Sterling making rounds, shaking hands with several men in expensive suits. "Gentlemen," I heard him say to one group, "I hope you'll consider what we discussed. Sterling Hotels is positioned for major growth, especially with some exciting new partnerships on the horizon." New partnerships. He was already counting chickens that hadn't hatched. Tomorrow was going to be very educational for the Sterling family. Very educational indeed. The morning of the wedding, I got 2 phone calls that changed everything. The first came at 7 a.m. General Hayes. Jim, I need to brief you on what we found about Sterling Hotels. I was sitting on my porch, drinking coffee and watching the sunrise. In 6 hours, I'd be at my son's wedding. In 12 hours, everything would be different. Tell me. Preston Sterling is in deeper trouble than we thought. $83 million in debt as of last quarter. 3 properties already in foreclosure. The bank called in their primary loan last month. How long does he have? Without a major cash infusion? Maybe 60 days. His accountants have been creative with the books, but creative only goes so far. I took a sip of coffee. And the defense contracting angle? That's where it gets interesting. Sterling has been telling investors that Sterling Hotels is expanding into government services, event hosting for military functions, conference facilities for Pentagon meetings, that kind of thing. But those contracts don't exist yet. He's been using the possibility of defense contracts to secure bridge financing. Essentially, he's borrowed money against deals that haven't been made. How much money? $15 million so far. And Jim, there's a clause in his financing agreement. If he doesn't secure a minimum $50 million annual contract with a defense contractor by June 30th, the entire debt becomes immediately payable. I set down my coffee cup. June 30th, 2 weeks from today. Exactly. Preston Sterling doesn't just need a defense contract. He needs one specific contract worth at least $50 million annually, or he loses everything. Everything? The hotels, the house, the cars, the country club membership? Even Sandra's trust fund is tied up in Sterling Hotel stock. If the company goes under, the family goes under. I thought about Sandra's comments from the night before, about Marcus deserving better, about me being an embarrassment to their family. Pat, there's something else I need you to do. Name it. I want you at the wedding today, as my guest. Jim, are you sure? This is a family event. Trust me. Your presence will be educational. The second call came an hour later. Unknown number. Mr. Thompson, this is Preston Sterling. I hope I'm not calling too early. Not at all, Preston. Congratulations on your daughter's wedding day. Thank you. Listen, I know today is about family, but I was hoping we might have a quick conversation at some point about business. What kind of business? Well, my assistant tells me your company works in defense contracting. Sterling Hotels is looking to diversify our revenue streams, and I think there might be some synergy between our organizations. Synergy. Another corporate buzzword for desperation. That's interesting. What did you have in mind? To be honest, I'm not entirely familiar with your company's capabilities. Thompson Defense Systems, right? Could you give me a brief overview of your operations? I almost laughed. Preston Sterling was asking for a sales pitch from a man whose daughter had called embarrassing 12 hours earlier. We handle procurement and logistics for military installations, I said. Some facility management, security consulting. That sounds promising. What's your annual revenue, if you don't mind me asking? I do mind, I said. But I'm sure we can discuss details at a more appropriate time. Of course. Time is somewhat important for us right now. Sterling Hotels is going through some restructuring, and having the right partnerships in place could make a significant difference. Restructuring was corporate speak for barely avoiding bankruptcy. I understand. We'll talk soon. Excellent. And Jim, thank you for everything you've done for this wedding. Sandra mentioned you've been very generous. Generous. That was one word for paying his daughter's entire wedding bill. Just want the kids to be happy, I said. Well, you're a good man. I look forward to our conversation. After I hung up, I sat on the porch for another hour, thinking. By tonight, Preston Sterling would know exactly who I was. Sandra would understand what respect actually meant, and Marcus would have to decide what kind of man he wanted to be. The wedding was at 6 p.m. I had my dress uniform cleaned and pressed, my medals polished, and my speech prepared. Most importantly, I had General Hayes on her way with a briefcase full of very interesting documents. Today was going to be a wedding the Sterling family would never forget. The ceremony went fine. Beautiful, actually. Marcus looked happy, Sandra looked stunning, and for 90 minutes I almost forgot about everything else. But receptions are different from ceremonies. Receptions are where people's true personalities come out. The trouble started during cocktail hour. Sandra had invited 150 guests, and about half of them were her parents' friends and business associates. Important people, according to Sandra. The kind of people who could open doors for the young couple's future. I was standing near the bar, nursing a Coke and watching the crowd, when I overheard Sandra talking to a group of her sorority sisters. "Oh my God, you guys, thank you so much for being here," she was saying. "This is literally my dream wedding." "Sandra, everything is gorgeous," one of them replied. "Your parents must be so proud." "They are. Daddy says this is the wedding I've always deserved." Another friend asked, "So where's Marcus's family? I want to meet them." Sandra's smile faltered slightly. "Well, Marcus's mom passed away when he was young. It's really just his dad." "Where is he? I'd love to say hello." Sandra glanced around the room until her eyes found me. "He's over there, by the bar." I watched her friends follow her gaze. Their expressions shifted when they saw me, the overweight man in the wheelchair holding a cane. "Oh," one of them said softly. "Was he Afghanistan?" Sandra said, lowering her voice. "He's been through a lot. It's really sad, actually." "That's so heartbreaking. Is he doing okay now?" Sandra hesitated. "He's managing. It's been hard for Marcus, honestly. Having to take care of someone who can't really take care of himself." I was 30 feet away, but I heard every word. "What does he do for work?" another friend asked. "Not much. Odd jobs here and there. Marcus has been supporting him financially, which is sweet, but—" Sandra shrugged. "It's a lot of responsibility for someone our age." That was a lie. I'd never taken a penny from Marcus. Ever. "How did Marcus afford this wedding?" one of them asked, looking around at the expensive decorations. Sandra's voice dropped even lower. "Well, his dad did help some. I think it was insurance money from his injury. You know, compensation from the government." Another lie. But this one was different. This one made my sacrifice sound like a business transaction. I decided it was time to move closer to the family tables. As I made my way across the room, using my cane to navigate the crowd, I heard fragments of other conversations. Such a brave young man, marrying into this situation. Hopefully she can be a good influence on the family. Sometimes love means making sacrifices. They were talking about Marcus like he was a saint for marrying the daughter of a successful businessman, like he was doing charity work by having me as a father. The real escalation started during dinner. Sandra had arranged for a professional MC to coordinate the evening's events. After the salad course, he announced it was time for family toasts. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll start with a toast from the bride's father, Preston Sterling." Preston stood up, tapping his champagne glass with a fork. The room fell silent. "Friends, family, distinguished guests," he began. "Today we celebrate not just a marriage, but the union of two families with bright futures ahead of them." He went on for several minutes about Sandra's accomplishments, Marcus's potential, and the Sterling family's commitment to excellence. "Now," Preston said, "I'd like to acknowledge Marcus's father, Nolan Thompson. Nolan has shown us all what courage looks like. Despite facing tremendous personal challenges, he's raised a son we're proud to welcome into our family." Polite applause, sympathetic smiles, the same zoo animal treatment from the night before. "And Nolan," Preston continued, looking directly at me, "I want you to know that Sandra and I are committed to supporting Marcus as he builds his future. We understand that family sometimes means helping those who cannot help themselves." More applause. But this time, something had shifted in the room. Some of the wedding guests, particularly the older men in expensive suits, were nodding approvingly. They thought Preston was being gracious and charitable. I remained seated, smiling politely. Then the MC called for the bride's toast. Sandra stood up, radiant in her wedding dress, holding a glass of champagne. This was her moment to shine in front of everyone who mattered to her. "Thank you all for being here on the most perfect day of my life," she began. She talked about love, about dreams coming true, about the importance of family support, standard wedding speech material. But then she went off script. "I also want to acknowledge that not every family looks the same," Sandra said, her voice carrying across the silent room. "Some families face challenges that test their strength and character." I felt a chill run down my spine. Marcus and I have learned that love sometimes means accepting difficult situations. It means being patient with family members who struggle. It means showing grace to those who maybe haven't lived up to their full potential. The room was dead quiet. Wedding guests were looking back and forth between Sandra and me. So tonight, I want to raise a glass to new beginnings, to families who support each other through thick and thin, and to the understanding that sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone is believing in their future, even when their past has been challenging. She paused, looking directly at me. To Marcus's father, Nolan Thompson, thank you for doing your best, even when your best wasn't quite enough. Tonight you can be proud that you raised a son who will never have to settle for less than he deserves. The room erupted in confused applause. Some people weren't sure if they'd just witnessed something beautiful or something horrible. But Sandra wasn't finished. And to my new family, she continued, her voice getting stronger, I promise to help Marcus become the man he's always had the potential to be. Someone who won't be held back by the limitations of others. Someone who understands that respect is earned, not given. She raised her glass higher. So here's to leaving the past behind and embracing a future where excellence isn't just a goal, it's a requirement. The final line was delivered while staring straight at me. To Marcus and Sandra Thompson, may they always strive for better. The applause this time was awkward. Half the room clapped enthusiastically, caught up in what they thought was an inspiring message about overcoming adversity. The other half sensed something darker underneath Sandra's words. As Sandra sat down, flushed with triumph, I noticed Preston Sterling beaming with pride. His daughter had just delivered what he thought was the perfect wedding toast. Gracious, inspiring, and subtly establishing the family hierarchy. Marcus looked confused and uncomfortable, but he raised his glass along with everyone else. That's when I saw her arrive. General Patricia Hayes, in her dress uniform, walking into the reception hall like she owned the place. The night was about to get very interesting. General Hayes's entrance was impossible to miss. She stood 6 feet tall in her dress uniform, 4 stars gleaming on her shoulders, enough ribbons and medals to outfit a small army. When a 4-star general walks into a room, conversations stop. The wedding coordinator hurried over to her, clearly flustered. Ma'am, I think there might be some confusion. This is a private event. I'm here as a guest of Colonel Thompson, General Hayes said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that makes people stand up straighter. Every head in the room turned toward me. Sandra's face went white. Preston Sterling looked like he'd been hit with a baseball bat. General Hayes walked directly to my table, her heels clicking on the marble floor. The entire reception watched her approach. Jim, she said, extending her hand. Sorry I'm late. Traffic was murder. I stood up, using my cane for support, and shook her hand. Pat, glad you could make it. Everyone, I'd like you to meet General Patricia Hayes, Pentagon Procurement Chief. The silence in the room was deafening. General Hayes, I continued, this is my son Marcus and his new wife Sandra, and that's Sandra's father, Preston Sterling. Preston Sterling was staring at General Hayes like she was an alien spacecraft that had just landed in his backyard. General, he said, his voice cracking slightly, what an unexpected honor. I had no idea Nolan had friends in such elevated positions. General Hayes smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. Jim and I go way back. We served together in Afghanistan. He saved my convoy when we hit an IED outside Kandahar. She looked around the room, taking in the expensive decorations, the designer flowers, the open bar that probably cost more than most people's cars. Beautiful wedding, she said. Someone spent some serious money here. Well, Preston said, puffing up slightly, we believe in doing things right. Only the best for our Sandra. Of course, though I have to say I'm a little surprised. Surprised? That Jim paid for all this and didn't even get mentioned in the toasts. The room went dead silent again. Sandra's champagne glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. I'm sorry, Preston said slowly. Could you repeat that? The wedding, General Hayes said matter-of-factly. Jim paid for it, the whole thing, $120,000 if I remember correctly. She turned to Sandra, who looked like she was about to faint. That was very generous of him, don't you think? Especially considering his, what did you call it in your toast? His challenging past? Sandra opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Preston Sterling was doing math in his head, his face cycling through confusion, realization, and horror. "Jim," he said carefully, "how exactly did you— what line of work are you in?" Before I could answer, General Hayes reached into her briefcase and pulled out a folder. "Jim runs Thompson Defense Systems, one of our most trusted contractors. We've worked together on some pretty significant projects over the years." She opened the folder and pulled out a document. "In fact, we just finalized the details on his latest contract. $52 million annually for the next 5 years. Facility management for 3 major installations." Preston Sterling's legs gave out. He actually grabbed the back of a chair to keep from falling. $52 million? He whispered. "Annually," General Hayes confirmed. "It's good work. Jim's company handles everything from security consulting to logistics management, very specialized stuff." She pulled out another document. "Jim, I brought those incorporation papers you asked for. Thompson Defense Systems, founded in 2020. Current valuation." She squinted at the page. $212 million. Sandra made a sound like a wounded animal. "But that's not why I'm here," General Hayes continued conversationally. "I'm here because Jim told me something interesting about Sterling Hotels." Every drop of blood drained from Preston Sterling's face. "He mentioned that Sterling Hotels might be interested in partnering with defense contractors. Something about diversifying revenue streams?" Preston Sterling nodded numbly. "Well, that's funny because I've been hearing some concerning things about Sterling Hotels from our finance people. Something about defaulting loans and missed payments on existing government contracts?" That's not entirely accurate," Preston stammered. General Hayes pulled out a third document. "According to this credit report, Sterling Hotels has $83 million in outstanding debt, 3 properties in foreclosure, and a financing agreement that requires securing a minimum $50 million defense contract by June 30th or the entire debt becomes immediately payable." She looked up from the paper. "June 30th. That's 2 weeks from today." Preston Sterling was now visibly shaking. "The interesting thing," General Hayes continued, "is that there's only one contractor in this region capable of handling a $50 million annual contract." She gestured toward me. "Jim's company?" The wedding reception had turned into a business meeting, and everyone in the room knew they were witnessing something extraordinary. "Now," General Hayes said, "I'm not here in any official capacity. I'm just here as Jim's friend, celebrating his son's wedding. But I did want to clarify something about that toast earlier." She turned to Sandra, who was now crying silently. "You mentioned that respect is earned, not given. I couldn't agree more." General Hayes reached into her briefcase one more time and pulled out a newspaper clipping. "This is from the Army Times, March 2019. The headline reads, 'Colonel Thompson saves convoy, loses leg in Afghanistan heroics.' Would you like me to read the article?" Nobody answered. "Colonel Thompson spotted an improvised explosive device on the main supply route outside Kandahar. Instead of taking cover, he drove his vehicle directly toward the IED to block it from a convoy carrying medical supplies to a field hospital. The explosion destroyed his vehicle and severely injured his left leg, but his actions saved 37 American lives." She folded the newspaper clipping carefully. "The Purple Heart citation mentions his extraordinary heroism and selfless sacrifice in the face of enemy action. Does that sound like someone whose best wasn't quite enough?" Sandra was sobbing now. Preston Sterling looked like he was having a heart attack. "But here's the really interesting part," General Hayes said. "Jim never talks about any of this. He never mentions his military service, his medals, or his company. He just pays for his son's wedding, shows up in his regular clothes, and gets called a fat pig." The entire reception was staring at Sandra now. "So, when you talk about respect being earned," General Hayes continued, "I think you might have that backwards. Jim earned his respect in Afghanistan. Jim earned his respect by building a successful business from a hospital bed. Jim earned his respect by quietly paying for this entire wedding without asking for credit." She closed her briefcase with a sharp snap. "The question is, what have you done to earn his?" Preston Sterling finally found his voice. "General Hayes," he said, his words tumbling over each other, "I had no idea. If I had known, we never would have. This is all a terrible misunderstanding." "Is it?" General Hayes asked. "Because it sounded pretty clear to me." She turned to the room full of wedding guests, many of whom were now whispering frantically to each other. Ladies and gentlemen, you're looking at one of the most successful defense contractors in the region, a decorated war hero, and a man who just spent $120,000 on his son's happiness. She looked back at Sandra. And you called him a fat pig. The silence that followed was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. I stood up slowly, using my cane for support. Every eye in the room was on me. "Thank you, Pat," I said quietly. "I appreciate you coming." General Hayes nodded. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." I looked around the reception hall at the expensive flowers, the crystal chandeliers, the open bar that I'd paid for. At the 150 guests who'd just learned that the man they'd been pitying was worth more than most of them would make in their lifetimes. Then I looked at Sandra. She was still crying, mascara running down her cheeks, her perfect wedding makeup ruined. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked small. "Sandra," I said, my voice carrying across the silent room, "congratulations on your wedding day." "Nolan, I'm so sorry. I didn't know." "You didn't know what? That I was successful? That I had money, that I'd served my country?" She opened her mouth but couldn't form words. "Or did you not know that respect works both ways?" Preston Sterling stepped forward, his hands shaking. "Jim, please, let me apologize for my family. If we had known who you were." "Who I am?" I repeated. "I'm the same person I was yesterday, Preston. The same person who's been sitting at your dinner table for 6 months. The same person who paid for this wedding." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my phone. "Pat, could you get me Janet Morrison's number? From Sterling Hotels Corporate?" General Hayes smiled and pulled out her own phone. "Already got it." I dialed the number, putting the call on speaker so everyone could hear. "Sterling Hotels Corporate Office, this is Janet." "Janet, this is Nolan Thompson from Thompson Defense Systems." "Mr. Thompson, thank you for calling. Mr. Sterling is very anxious to speak with you about the partnership opportunity." I looked at Preston Sterling, whose face had gone gray. "About that, Janet, I've decided not to move forward with Sterling Hotels." There was a pause. "Sir, may I ask why?" "Let's just say there are fundamental differences in how we view professional relationships." "Mr. Thompson, I hope you'll reconsider. Mr. Sterling has been very clear that this partnership is crucial for our company's future. I understand, but my decision is final." "Sir, without this contract, Sterling Hotels will face immediate financial restructuring. There could be significant job losses. That's unfortunate, but business is business." I ended the call and put my phone back in my pocket. Preston Sterling was now visibly shaking. "Jim, please, you can't. This will destroy everything. The company, the hotels, our family." "Your family?" I looked around the room. "Preston, 30 minutes ago your daughter called me a fat pig in front of 150 people. She said my best wasn't good enough. She implied that I was holding your son-in-law back." "She didn't mean it. Sandra was just... she's young. She made a mistake." "Did she?" I turned to Sandra, who was clutching Marcus's arm like a life preserver. "Sandra, do you remember what you said about respect being earned?" She nodded through her tears. "You were right. Respect is earned, and so are consequences." I reached into my other pocket and pulled out a folded document. "This is a withdrawal form for the trust fund that's been set up for Marcus's future. $150,000 that I've been contributing to since he graduated college." Marcus's eyes went wide. "Dad, you never told me." "I was saving it as a surprise, a wedding gift." I looked at the form, then back at Sandra. "But trust funds are for people who understand the value of family, people who treat their relatives with dignity and respect." I tore the document in half. "Consider it a lesson in earning things instead of expecting them." Sandra let out a sob that could be heard across the room. Preston Sterling fell into a chair, his head in his hands. "Jim," he whispered, "you're destroying us." "No, Preston, I'm teaching you about consequences. Your daughter spent 6 months treating me like a burden, like something to be ashamed of. She called me a fat pig at her own wedding. She said I was holding Marcus back." I gestured around the room. "These people heard her say it. They watched her humiliate a disabled veteran at a family celebration, and you were proud of her for it. We didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't bother to ask. You saw a man in a wheelchair and decided I wasn't worth your time.
You saw someone who shops at Walmart and drives an old truck and assumed I had nothing to offer. The room was dead silent except for Sandra's crying. But here's the thing about assumptions, Preston. Sometimes they're wrong. I looked at Marcus, who hadn't said a word through any of this. Son, I love you. I always will. But you married someone who thinks your father is an embarrassment. You sat there while she insulted me in front of our family and friends. You have some decisions to make about what kind of man you want to be. Marcus opened his mouth, but I held up my hand. Not tonight.
Tonight is your wedding night. Enjoy it. I turned to General Hayes. Pat, I think it's time we leave. Absolutely. As we walked toward the exit, the 150 wedding guests parted like the Red Sea. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. At the door, I turned back one last time. Oh, and Preston, that invoice for the wedding expenses, it's due in 30 days, cash only. We walked out into the night, leaving behind the most expensive lesson the Sterling family would ever receive. The fallout from the wedding started before we even got to the parking lot. My phone began buzzing with text messages. Wedding guests who'd witnessed the confrontation were already spreading the story. By the time General Hayes and I reached our cars, social media was lighting up with posts about the wedding revenge of the year. Jim, General Hayes said as we stood in the country club parking lot, that was either the most justified thing I've ever seen, or we're both going to hell. Probably both, I said. She laughed. Want to get a drink and talk about it? Rain check. I think I need to go home and process what just happened. Fair enough. But Jim, you did the right thing. That girl needed to learn that actions have consequences. I drove home in silence, my phone buzzing constantly with calls and messages I wasn't ready to answer yet. The real consequences started showing up the next morning. My phone rang at 7 a.m. Marcus. Dad, we need to talk. Good morning to you too. Dad, this isn't funny. Do you have any idea what you've done? I poured myself coffee and sat on my porch. I have a pretty good idea. Sandra's been crying all night. Her family is in complete panic. Her father is talking about bankruptcy lawyers. That's unfortunate. Dad, this is serious. Preston Sterling called 3 times last night begging me to convince you to reconsider the contract. And what did you tell him? There was a long pause. I told him I'd talk to you. Marcus, let me ask you something. During Sandra's speech last night, when she called me a fat pig and said my best wasn't good enough, what did you do? Another pause. I was in shock. I couldn't believe she said that. But you didn't say anything. No. You didn't defend me. You didn't stand up for your father. You just sat there. Dad, I didn't know what to do. It happened so fast. Marcus, your wife publicly humiliated a disabled veteran at your wedding reception. That veteran happened to be your father, who just spent $120,000 on your happiness. And you're calling me to ask for favors for her family? Dad, please. I know Sandra was wrong. She knows she was wrong. But destroying her family's business won't fix anything. Won't it? By noon, the story had reached the local news. A reporter called asking for comment about the veteran's wedding revenge story that was trending on social media. I declined to comment. But Preston Sterling didn't. The Channel 7 news van was parked outside Sterling Hotel's corporate headquarters by 2 p.m. Preston gave an interview that evening that I watched from my living room. Mr. Sterling, the reporter asked, is it true that your daughter insulted a war veteran at her own wedding? Preston looked haggard, like he'd aged 10 years overnight. There was a misunderstanding at the wedding, he said carefully. Some things were said in the heat of emotion that weren't intended the way they sounded. And is it true that this veteran's company was considering a $50 million contract with Sterling Hotels? We had preliminary discussions about a potential partnership, yes. What's the status of those discussions now? Preston's shoulders sagged. Mr. Thompson has decided not to move forward with the partnership. What does this mean for Sterling Hotels? We're exploring other options. But there weren't other options. By Thursday, 3 major creditors had called in their loans. By Friday, Sterling Hotels had filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The local business journal ran a front-page story. Sterling Hotels' empire collapses after wedding incident. The article detailed the company's financial problems and included quotes from employees who were losing their jobs. One quote stood out. It's crazy that a family business that's been around for 40 years could be destroyed by one wedding toast, said Janet Morrison, former corporate office manager. But I guess when you insult the wrong person, consequences follow. Sandra called me on Saturday morning. "Nolan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need to apologize." "Sandra, you don't need to do anything." "Yes, I do. What I said at the wedding was horrible, inexcusable. I was showing off for my friends, and I said terrible things about someone who deserved respect." "Why are you calling me Sandra?"
"Because I destroyed my family's business with my stupidity. Because my father is talking about selling the house. Because Marcus won't speak to me. And because a decorated war hero deserved better than being called a fat pig at his son's wedding." "Yes," I said. "He did. Is there anything I can do? Any way to fix this?" I thought about it for a long moment. "Sandra, this isn't about the business contract. This is about learning that words have power, that respect matters, that treating people with dignity isn't optional. I understand that now. Do you? Because 3 days ago you thought I was an embarrassment to your family. Now you're calling because you need something." She was quiet for a long time. "You're right," she finally said. "I'm sorry." Apology accepted. But Sandra? Yes? Respect is earned, not given. You said so yourself. The consequences were real, immediate, and permanent, just like they should be.
6 months later, I got a letter in the mail. It was from Sandra, handwritten on simple stationery. No fancy Sterling Hotel's letterhead this time. "Dear Nolan," it began, "I wanted you to know that Marcus and I have been going to counseling. We're learning to communicate better, to respect each other's families, and to understand that marriage means building bridges, not burning them." The letter went on to explain that she'd gotten a job at a nonprofit organization that helps veterans transition to civilian careers. "I wanted to do something meaningful with my life instead of just existing on family money," she wrote. "I know an apology can't undo what I said at our wedding. I know that words have consequences, and my words cost my family everything they'd built. But I also know that I needed to learn this lesson, and I'm grateful you taught it to me, even though it was painful." The letter ended with, "I hope someday you can forgive me. Not for my family's sake, but because I've learned what real respect looks like, and I want to earn yours." I folded the letter and put it in my desk drawer. Marcus had been visiting more often. We talked about business, about life, about what it means to stand up for the people you love. He never asked me to reconsider the Sterling Hotel's contract, and I respected him for that. "Dad," he said during one of our conversations, "I should have defended you at the wedding." "Yes, you should have. Why didn't you teach me to fight back sooner?" "Because I thought watching me be quiet would teach you how to be strong. Turns out sometimes being strong means being loud. We both learned something from that wedding." A few weeks ago, General Hayes called with interesting news. Preston Sterling had approached her about a much smaller contract, facility management for a single building, worth about $50,000 annually instead of $50 million. "What should I tell him?" she asked. Tell him to submit a proper bid like everyone else. And if his bid is competitive, then Sterling Hotels can earn their way back, one contract at a time. Because respect isn't just earned, it's maintained through consistent action. And sometimes, the best lessons are the ones that cost the most to learn. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe and let me know in the comments. Have you ever had to teach someone about respect the hard way?